Hi everyone, we're here another week of Mutant Watch, and we have ARIANA MAHER as a guest, and she's a letterer in like too many stuff. Like you probably if you like the books from like past 10 years, probably some of your favorite books, including like S.W.O.R.D, Marvel's Voices, Indigenous Voices, Silk, a part of Hellions and Excalibur. And what am I leaving here? Well, a lot of stuff. And so we're gonna talk about lettering mostly today, and we're gonna go around some of her works and just like talk a little bit around it. So that's it, and we can kick it.
This week on Mutant Watch.
So the first thing we want to ask you, and well, me personally, is to give a little bit of context to the people watching in case they don't know you already. To how did you get into the X books, and both as a fan and as someone that does lettering professionally there? So that's will be my first question.
Okay, that's a big one. I first got into X-Men when I was a little girl and I watched the cartoon series. So watching the animated series was a big deal for me. So watching Jubilee and Gambit and Storm and all of them in their adventures was what caught me on to them when I was a kid. And then one day we were going through, I was with my mom and we were going through, it's hard to describe. It's kind of like a Costco. It was called Price Club. And it was these big like storage stores. They were basically warehouses, and so it'd be cheaper to buy products straight from those stores. And I was there, and there was this big pile of Marvel comics, all saran wrapped together and at a discount price. And I went up to my mom and I begged for these comics because at the top of the pile, I saw it was Jean Grey holding Jubilee, and Jubilee was crying. And I was like, what is going on here? I want to read that. So my mom gave in, and she let me bring home these comics. And there was a bunch. There was Silver Surfer and Thor, but the very first one I beelined to was X-Men. And it was Uncanny X-Men number 303. And it was the death of Ilyana Rasputin. And that's what hooked me on comics from then on. Every Wednesday, my mom would go to the grocery store, and if she didn't have to go to the grocery store, I'd still beg so that I could go to the comic book store right next door. And she'd give me like $3 or $4 of allowance. Like I think it was $5 allowance every week. And I would buy like one issue, and I'd save up some more money to buy 2 issues the next week. And it got really complicated once Age of Apocalypse happened. And I was like, I need to read all these issues. How? But I amassed this collection until we moved overseas. My dad got stationed in Japan, and like they had a few comics here and there. I remember reading Joe Kelly's Deadpool until the naval commissary stopped holding it anymore, but there was no local comic book store. Until I found one in downtown Yokohama. I found one American comic book store, and so I got very excited and would go there as often as I could. Then, years passed. I never really completely fell off from comics because getting into reading manga really helped supplanted my Japanese language studies. And I graduated in language studies for Japanese and became a translator and moved back to Japan. And it was while I was a translator in Japan, I realized I enjoyed translation. I hated interpretation, and you could not do one with the other in the job I was in. So one way to stress relief was finding another comic book store, Blister, in Asakusa in Japan. It's in Tokyo. And I think they had to move around quite a bit, but I would go cross town to pick up Peter David's X Factor, I think. Like, I would just try to keep reading those. And around that time, I started doodling around with Adobe Illustrator as a hobby. And a friend of mine, we were both into reading X Factor together. I really loved Richter because he had like the best stories. and she was drawing a little like a webcomic on DeviantArt. And so I was like, I'll figure out how to letter it for you. And so that's when I started teaching myself lettering a bit. And just a little bit every time. And the next thing I knew, I suddenly found this new hobby, this new outlet, lettering comics. And a year later, I had left my job in Japan. I had money saved up, so I wanted to reconnect with my mom. So I moved to Brazil. She lives in Rio Grande do Sul, so it's like all the way in the south side in Brazil. And it's middle of nowhere. I just had my dinky little laptop with me, but my friend had a comic gig because she's a colorist. She's like, hey, you wanna join me on this gig? And I'm like, what? So I started lettering a comic that soon branched off into me lettering more comics. I had an old friend. We were both into the manga series Bleach way back in the day. And we became fast friends for like good 10 years when she asked me to start working on her webcomic, Sphere Theory. And that's still going on. And I started doing more and more of her projects and stories. And that eventually like got me more confident as a letterer. About 5 years of doing this as a hobby. And just like something to do with friends, something that I do out of enjoyment. Someone, I believe it was Sloan Leong, she invited me onto a team to do an image book from Under Mountains. And I lettered that. And that got me into lettering other books. And then as I was lettering other books, writers or artists would recommend me to other people. And that would spark off other things. And then I think it was around the time I joined Twitter. And just so I could connect with people that I was going to meet at conventions that I knew. Because otherwise I did not understand the point of Twitter. And then that eventually had me talking about lettering on Twitter. And the next thing I knew, editors started noticing me from there. And from an editor's call out, I put up my portfolio and I started working on Nancy Drew for Dynamite. So I did Nancy Drew with Kelly Thompson and like that. The whole team was amazing on that one. And then I did so good, they wanted me to do James Bond. DC picked me up to do some kids books. So I did Zatanna with Yoshi Yoshitani. And that's like still one of my favorite books I've done. For Image, I've done Flavor, which was one of my favorites, and then it died out at 6 issues. It was one of the great heartbreaks. And I just got to work with various different people at different stages and getting to know more letters, more colorists, more artists, more writers. And it was last year, February of last year, I was just doing my thing. I had a day job working 40-hour, weeks at Nintendo. I was a software tester. I'd come back to the States and start working there. Really random job. But at night, I would come home and I'd work another roughly 30 to 40-hour week on lettering, just doing various gigs. So it was lucrative, but I had no free time. That was all I was doing. And then February of last year, it was the head of virtual calligraphy who reached out to me. And he just sent me an email out of the blue. He's like, hey, do you want to join our team? And all I thought was like, to join their team, I would have to quit my day job. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to do this.
Yay.
So I joined. After it was a process. It was actually April. It was 1 year ago, almost just a little past, because it was April 1st of last year that I officially started working on Marvel books. I left Nintendo and just worked on, and it just became my full-time job. This past year with the pandemic has been super difficult, but I don't regret my choice one bit. Like, yeah, I'm not making as much as when I was working 80-hour weeks, but I don't want to work there that much. Not at that cost. I mean, my boyfriend's been super supportive and he's been looking out for me, but it's been really helpful having someone in my life to be like, wait, I don't need to letter all day. I want to spend time and watch stupid TV shows and eat dinner and play Magic the Gathering with my boyfriend instead. So it's balancing out. It's balancing out a lot more. But the first book I got to do at Marvel, like properly, it was Corey Petit reached out to me and they were reshuffling some of the assignments and he's like, hey, do you want to do Excalibur? And I was like, Corey, oh my God, you have no idea. This has every single favorite character. You know, well, I mean, Storm is also a favorite, but Betsy's okay. It's Gambit and Rogue and Richter and Jubilee. And it's like, that's like basically all the best characters from the animated series. It's like, yeah, I want to letter this. And I still have it framed on my wall, the issue 11 of Excalibur. Mm-hmm. That was my debut issue that I had finished lettering. My very first time with Marvel. It was, Chris brought me on. Joe mentored me through it, and I was mentored for about 2 months. And then the past year, whenever I have a question, I just go to the rest of the studio guys, or I go to Sue, who's a production manager, and she used to letter too. So it's kind of neat because I'm not. It's one thing when you are the first woman to be on some part of the industry, but it's so much more welcoming and comfortable when you know there's been many before you. In fact, one of the people who you're working with used to do your job and can help you and advise you and share stories with you of other great women in the industry too. So that's really turned out to be a huge part of my time here. Is just like, I'm really glad I made this path. I'm really glad I got to letter X-Men books. Super excited for S.W.O.R.D. S.W.O.R.D is like amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. So before we continue, I want to warn everyone, because I forgot earlier that our website currently is down. So the more at Comic Watch that says right here, it's not more. There's nothing there for now. But yes, so but we're working on it, and we will be live again in the course of next week, and probably we'll have an article about this interview and etc. So stay tuned, people. Okay. And so I wanted to say that because I totally forgot. And so continuing to ask you, now that you talk about S.W.O.R.D, one of the things that I really, really like about that book is that in the first issue, you use like 3 or maybe even 4 different fonts, and you use coloring within the font. Is there's a part of the book that has like a spell or something like that, where they are work their powers together, and you have these levers that go like change the color with the color scheme of the book, that I thought was amazing. And it's truly like very risky. It's like not the usual thing you found in the first issue of a book. And I want to ask you how that come up, if that is something that the artist asked you, or that's something that you all talk about, and how was that? Because I was like amazed by the lettering of that first issue, and of course all the other ones, but that first, it was like a sook for me.
Yeah, that particular issue was a huge involvement with me, because they had me do the a lot of the data pages for that particular. They usually letterers don't usually do the data pages, but in this case, I had done it at that time. So doing the organization spread and the data pages had give me a better understanding of what Tom Mueller's overall design plan for the X-Men line is. And then it came to these big spreads in the script. And when it came to the spreads, that was actually a fully collaborative work because it was the writer who came up with the initial concept or where he wanted all of the text to go and how he wanted it to flow over the page and the kind of vision he had in mind. And I was like, okay. So I came up with the font and the initial, we worked out the placements, made sure that was good. I had a lot more freedom in that scene to make font things larger or smaller depending on the impact of that text on the page. And that was over the inks drawn by Valerio. But then it was when we got Marte's colors, then it changed significantly because I realized I could get it in tune with what Marte was doing on the page. So I color sampled all of his colors on the page, and with his rainbows, I made my own rainbows over the page as well. And then we had those big impactful scenes where everything was turning more light blue, and so I worked with what was on the final pages to understand, okay, this is how we want the color to work with the text. So everything seems like it's a part of it, and yet echoing over on top of it. So it was fully collaborative. I work entirely through the editor when discussing these things, but Annalise is really great at getting feedback from all the different parts of the team and delivering them to everyone so that we know what if the final product is what everyone wants.
Wow.
It was nice. It was fun. I love that first issue.
Yeah, I think that the collaborative nature shows because it was noticeable that the colors were changing with the color schemes of the art, and that was, I think, very difficult to do without talking out with people. So that's
yeah, it was really fun because getting the initial idea from the team of what they wanted and delivering something that needed very little change after, because that it was okay, this is what they want. I'm glad when I can do that. Sometimes it can be difficult when people communicate an idea of what they want for the lettering, but then they don't really know what they want. And then as a designer, you just kind of guess. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But with this, the communications has been really good. So I'm really happy with working on that series. I'm really enthusiastic for it.
So I don't know if you can answer this, but now you got me curious. Are there any vague examples that you've got that you've kind of just been left scratching your head on?
Not on Marvel projects, no. I've been working in this industry for over it's been a decade now. It's been over a decade now. I feel super old, but there will be times where I'm not being vague to be vague. It's just my memory's not that great. I've just been working mostly on Marvel titles this past year, but sometimes they'll be oh, we want it to look like a children's book kind of style, but not with typeface. It's got to look handwritten, or it's got to have a rough style, but more like a childish drawn style, not a more organic style. And it's just, sometimes it's hard to grasp it, and I have to go through multiple ideas until it's okay, fine, now we have what we want for this comic. The great thing about lettering, though, is that once you've worked out that initial design, the first issue is always the most time consuming. Once you've worked out that design, you're set. You know exactly what you got to do. You set up your templates, it runs smoothly. And you can just enjoy on the actual fun of lettering, figuring out the placements, coming up with comedic moments to make sure that lettering pops and stuff. Hellions is a really good example of this, where I know exactly what to do. I know exactly what the style is. And then it's just, how much can I make Sinister scream when he has to scream?
So I want to ask you about projects that are kind of different, but also within Marvel, about Marvel's Voices, Indigenous Voices, that you lettered that one, and also Demon Days. And in both of these, there's also things that I feel like are not as much used within lettering, at least in a traditional sense, which is like in Demon Days, the balloons are colored inside. They have like a color scheme inside, and in Indigenous Voices you have like a very different style of lettering for its story. Not totally different, but there's like things that are feeding into some stories that are not into others. Like the Echo story has all these stuff with the phone and etc. And I wonder how was that, because for example in Indigenous Voices it's like an anthology, so I don't know if you have like feedback with everyone involved in the book. So that's
the great thing with having an editor is that they kind of act as the filter. They go through and help make all the big decisions before they come to me. So that way, if I'm on a book without an editor, then everyone's going to throw their hat in, and sometimes it can get confusing because the writer will have this big idea and the artist will be like, this is what I drew, you're going to have to go with it. And it sometimes can be contentious, but when you have an editor, they kind of draw it all together and be like, okay, we're doing this, this, and this. And it's like, okay, I'm going to go with these directions. And the Legacy Indigenous Voices book and the Demon Days, well, they're both different in particular ways. With Indigenous Voices anthology, and that one in particular, the thing I kept in mind was with all of the X-Men related stories, I prefer lettering them we kind of nickname it the Hickman style because I just want it to be consistent with the rest of the X-Men books. So that way, if someone's talking about, what Danny Moonstar is doing in the story in Indigenous Voices, then they get in and they see a panel of it. It doesn't look out of place from any of the other, like New Mutants or any of the other lettering from the other books. So I just use straight those templates from there. It's quicker to be like, okay, this is what is currently happening in this world. This is the lettering for this world, so I'm not going to deviate from that. But for the Avengers and other like non-X-Men characters, I can do whatever I want. So I just kind of played with a few other different styles and worked with that. And that, there was some cool effects I got to do too. There was all the text messages coming in, I had to have a certain way because the artist drew the faces on the text messages, and I had to come up with text messages around them, like fill out the contents of it. And then I had to work out, because there was at one point the phone breaks and there's cracks all over it, but you're supposed to be able to see the text message behind it, except that wasn't drawn in. I had to letter it. So I had to figure out a trick to do that too. So there was like some nifty ideas I got to implement while working on that anthology. But with Demon Days, I had to kind of scrap any style ideas and start fresh with a whole new set styles. This isn't like an Avengers book. This isn't exactly like an X-Men book. This is Peach Momoko. And the editors were really, really nice at being like, okay, you have free form, develop the lettering how you want. What do you have in mind? This is what we need. And with Peach Momoko's artwork, she draws on textured paper with markers and other medias. And you can see that it's a really organic material all throughout. And if I just letter it as I usually do, like with Avengers or X-Men, it's going to just look like it's kind of stickered on top of it, It's just it pops, but pops too much. It's just going to float on top. It's not going to feel like it's part of the artwork. And with letterers, it's inherently tricky because we're not drawing on top of art. We're designing on top of art. And we're trying to put these design elements on top of organic artwork. It's going to inherently be an additional challenge. So with hers, I developed a rougher style of balloon. The lines aren't even around. And then for the reason I put the colors inside the balloon was because the majority of that issue of the X-Men issue was set in a fairy tale. So to try to just slightly imitate that parchment feel, I made it slightly more yellowed, slightly more aged for the internals of the balloon. But at the very, very last scene, spoilers, of the story, a young woman wakes up and she's in modern day Japan. And so since that's modern day Japan, the fills of those balloons are no longer aged, it's just white. So the next issue, I haven't worked on it yet, but I'm anticipating it to be like more like white fills on page, but still has that rough edge. So it feels like it's an intentional drawn part of Peach Momoko style. That was another tricky thing about her sound effects too, is that she has a lot of hand-drawn sound effects, some in Japanese, and we decided to keep the Japanese in there. And then with a lot of the other sound effects, I would just have to put them in. And I couldn't just use a font. Sometimes you can use various different fonts for sound effects, manipulate them, make them look good, and they look good on the page. With this one, not for all of them, but for the majority of, like a huge chunk of them, particularly for the venomous snakes sound effects, I drew those. So I drew those out onto the page with a vector brush, and those sit a lot easier on the page than if I were to use a font. So I anticipate doing that more with more of Peach Momoko stuff. It'll be fun.
So how much would you say that? Oh, wait, it's.
Do you have it?
Oh. I don't know why, but I lost something. So how much would you say that the design work is better to be done? I mean, it's way better, but I want to know more about this. To like have that feedback with the editor or with whoever to adapt what's in the comic, than if you have a comic and you have just to like letter it and just go around without the comic being like, you know, how much would you have to adapt to what is there and how much you can?
Usually I'm asking for a lot of feedback on the first issue. And then after the first issue, if we know the series and we know the style of the series, there's not really much necessity to get a lot of feedback from people because they'll just trust me to anticipate how it's supposed to be done. And I get all of my cues from the script. So if they say someone whispers, I'm going to make them whisper. If say someone screams, I'm going to make them scream. And then I kind of choose the severity of how that's going to look on the page. And for the most part, that works great for me. Some editors and with some other publishers will want to put in, what do you call it? Placements. And they'll put like little markers of like, this is where we want all the lettering to go on a page. But I have a tendency not to look at that until I'm checking at the end whether I'm close enough to those placements, because inherently I'm going to have the text and I know where it's going to want to go on the page. So with Marvel in particular, they kind of give me the free rein. If they have the style down and they know what they are expecting, I'm going to deliver on that, and they don't have to worry about anything extra. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. I have a bunch, but if anyone else has any, you can jump on it. Oh, okay.
I have a question. So you mentioned that it's the first issue that tends to involve the most back and forth as opposed to the rest of the issues. What about when you come in the middle of a run where you're kind of taking over for a letterer who has been doing it, like what happened with Excalibur?
That one in particular was not too jarring because with virtual calligraphy in particular with our team, it's really great because whenever we want to make sure our style is consistent, we just share the elements in our templates with each other. So Corey didn't just say, hey, you want to work on Excalibur, go do it. It was, hey, here's the material I'm working with. Here's the style that we've been using for X-Men books. And those templates work on all of the X-Men books. So if they suddenly ask me to letter X-Factor or New Mutants for one issue, like say one of the letterers is out for the day, I don't really need their templates. I have an X-Men template that works. If it's something like Spider-Man or Avengers, I'll ask for a template and be like, hey, can we share on this so that I know I'm using the right elements from the previous issue? Because once you have that series going, you don't want to change up the lettering. Not that much. If you can avoid it, you wouldn't do it because the important thing with the lettering is that you keep it consistent. You don't want the reader to notice the lettering unless you want to catch their attention. Otherwise, it's just the mode that they're able to absorb the comic book and absorb the story. So when you want to startle them, when you want to surprise them, that's when you do something inconsistent. Like a sound effect is a good example of this. So yeah, when handing off a book to someone else, we tend to make sure they have all the material they need so that the previous issue, I don't think issue 10 and issue 11 of Excalibur look significantly different because I learned from Corey's style and I understood the overall X-Men style and I went with that.
Cool.
And I'm curious about in S.W.O.R.D, in the second, third, and fourth issue, did you also have to do some of the lettering in the data pages? Because that's something...
Second issue, yeah. I think things evened out again, and we were able to redistribute work after that. So I haven't done data pages except for there's I believe it's issue 4 of S.W.O.R.D. There's one page that had Manifold's data page along with the artwork. That one I made sure both were incorporated. And since I already had the design elements, it wasn't that difficult to do. So yeah, that was pretty fun. I really love that issue.
And for the visual effects for the SCFs, there's any kind of like a pushback with the artist, apart from what you say about Pitch Momoko, which is not like literally talking with the artist, it's more like the editors deciding what you're all gonna do. Is there any case in which you see some art and you're like, I could do this, but the artist has already done something, or is there any like...
It's not too often that the artist incorporates their own sound effects as much. Sometimes they do almost fully incorporate the sound effects, in which case I just let them do their thing and I skip those elements of the script and let their sound effects work. It'll be theirs. I don't often let her on top of the artist sound effects because if they wanted it there, then I'm going to respect that. So if there's ever an argument, they're going to win. But for the most part, a lot of artists will leave the sound effects to me. And then it's a matter of me making sure that the placement covers the right things and doesn't cover the wrong things. You know, there's certain things in the elements of the art that you don't want to cover up accidentally with your sound effects, and that's what I try to avoid. But at the same time, if the sound effect needs to be loud and needs to be out there, then I'm going to have to figure out how much of the artwork I'm willing to cover.
In a related question to that, artists that you work with that work digitally and are then working in layers, do you have an opportunity with that art? Like if there is a layer that has an effects on it or something like that, do they offer that to you? Do you have an opportunity to work with that? Or are you usually working with a unified final image?
Yeah, it depends. I would say for the majority of majorly published works with like DC and Marvel, there's not enough time to fully incorporate things. So I have to consider ways for me to use clipping masks in the sound effects so it looks like it stands behind a character. You cut out certain elements. And I do that a lot where I'll draw over their lines to see where the art is, cut out those elements from the sound effect, and then it looks like it's behind the character. But when it's more indie projects, like with Jada Itkasi on there and Alex Singer, they have a webcomic called Sphere Theory. I've mentioned that before. And it's from their Little Foolery website. It's an ongoing webcomic. We've worked on it for years. And the particular way I collaborate with the artist on that is not a way that I get to do with almost anyone else. And it's particularly special because she will send me a rough drawing. I will let her a rough placements over her drawing. And then when she finishes, that gives her a good idea of where the lettering is going to go. And once she has that good idea, she's going to finish the artwork. And then she sends it to me and I'll finish up the lettering. But when it comes to the sound effects, I'll just put the basic vector elements. And then she takes those and she can incorporate however she wants. And it's a very, very organic process. It's more time consuming, yeah, and it definitely wouldn't work in a big production environment, but it's something special that we get to do with each other because we've been long, long friends and we've been working on it together for so long.
So I'm curious about how different is the indie work, because you have touched a little bit about that. But for example, in Prism Stalker, the series that is kind of a sci-fi and like very horror, you do a lot of work with the lettering that is like breaking apart a little bit and all that. And I'm curious about that process, like about when you have to be more creative in that way.
Yeah. I definitely had to really extend my creative muscles to like reach Sloane's vision for the book. She had very particular ways she wanted to do the book and the kind of style. She wanted a really fluid use of color throughout. And that's when I discovered, because I was still pretty early in my career, that's when I discovered that choosing color is really important for the publisher, because you could choose colors that would bleed badly with the rest of the art in your lettering. So I had to redo a lot of my colors to make sure that it all shone through and wouldn't bleed over each other. And then when it came to special moments of like, it was very kind of surreal moments of thoughts or dreams or visions. And Sloane would not only just put them in the script and say, do this, she would describe what her vision was for what she wanted it to do. And it's still one of my favorite moments when she's like, okay, on this page, take this word balloon and break it, and take this other room and reverse it. And I was like, okay, I'll break it and reverse it and see what I can do. And it turned into one of my favorite pages. So yeah, she helped extend my creativity with her own creativity. She gave me the ideas, and then I was problem solving to try to see, okay, how do I deliver that idea? And next thing I know, I've learned 5 or 6 new techniques that I can use in Illustrator to letter a book. So it was a very educational, very, very fun experience.
And have you, I'm not sure because I haven't like checked, but have you done any work that is like directly to collection, that is not like issue divided, or like a graphic novel that is directly into graphic novel?
Yeah. The first one I did was Firebug by Johnny Christmas and Tamara Bonvillain. And that was a crash course on trying to put together a graphic novel, because all of us were kind of new in different areas with working on this kind of book, and ended up being very educational. Now looking back on it, there were so many times it's like, I could have saved a lot of time if I had done it this way, but now I know. That one was definitely an interesting challenge where we were just not putting out an issue by issue, but just putting the whole book out. And I'm glad with how it came out. It was a challenge, but the team members were really great. And then I've done other books. A lot of the young adult line in DC books, they all come out as one full book. And then we have a new book with Marvel through Scholastic called Miles Morales' Shockwave.
Oh,
It's also going out as one full book. And I think these kind of books are going to be really great for kids. Like they don't want to read chapter by chapter. They want to read the full story. So, and trying to explain, it's like, no, you can't find out the next chapter until you read, the next series in a different X-Men book or something. It's like, here's the full book. So I think that's a great way to get kids into graphic novels. So those are very enjoyable, but they're also very time consuming, and they feel weightier because there's just it's so much concentrated time that you have to put on one project, as opposed to, okay, this week I'm going to work on Silk, next week I'm going to work on S.W.O.R.D, that kind of thing. It's just like, okay, this one book, next 2 weeks, this is all I'm thinking about. It's a different mode to work in.
and I want to ask you to have any like lettering inspirations, like creatives that you like a lot, especially within X books, that you have like, oh, I like this letter a lot, even if it's people from like ages ago. I'm just curious about that.
It's really funny because the very first X-Men issue I read, 303, soon after I joined Marvel and started talking with the rest of the VC team, we were talking about all of our first issues that we had read. And when I mentioned my first issue, we all realized, like, oh, my boss, Chris Eliopoulos, he was the one who lettered that. And I was like, and he's like, oh, I feel so old. But it's like, holy crap, you lettered the first issue. It was my introduction to X-Men. And looking back on that issue, the lettering in that is phenomenal. Chris does this amazing job getting together the moment where, you lose Ileana and all the emotions going through those scenes. He really captured it with the lettering. I mean, was it Tom Orzeszewski? I think I'm probably pronouncing this wrong. He lettered all of Chris Claremont's stuff back in the 80s. He had this, I was rereading the Magic miniseries from back in the 80s. And just, there's so much script that Chris Claremont puts out. There's so much dialogue, an unnecessary amount of dialogue sometimes. For a letter, it's like, you don't have to say this much. The art is there. But his style of lettering, he's able to capture those moments and make it flow so that you don't even realize that you're reading basically a novel. You're actually enjoying it properly as a comic. And I find that really admirable. Nowadays, just like the rest of the team, I really admire all their work and all the different ideas they have and they put into all the Marvel books they letter. But then there's also a lot of indie letterers out there, like freelancers who I've spent a lot of time talking lettering with. There's Hassan and Aditya, and there's DC and DC Hopkins, and all these other guys who are out there doing these really creative ideas. And it's really fun to see them work. And I'll see a page that has really cool lettering, and I'll be like, oh man, Tom Napolitano did something really amazing in this like Wonder Woman issue. How do I do that? And so I'll think about it. I'll try to reverse engineer. I'll get it wrong, but I'll come up with a new idea. And it's a really fun creative space for designers right now. It's really unique creative space too, because we work with a lot of fonts. And the majority of those fonts are created by 2 studios, Comic Craft or Blambot, for the majority of it. And these guys are freelancers too. So it's like, oh, I was assigned to this book at Dark Horse, but someone else got it. Who got it? Oh, it's the guy that made the fonts that I'm working on. Of course he's going to get it. I'm not going to be jealous. You kind of have a sense of humbleness here, because when it comes to like winning a big award, it's like, it's not going to happen. I mean, you look at the Eisners or something, you know it's not going to happen because they group hand letterers and digital letters in the same category. Like, and hand lettering is so much more time consuming and artistically focused and imaginative, and it has a lot more freedom to it, that I just don't feel like we go into kind of different categories when it comes to that. You can be a really good digital letterer, but that won't guarantee you as a hand letterer, and vice versa. And when you're up against someone like Stan Sakai, it's like, of course Stan Sakai is going to win. But it's more like who the people who get nominated, like Jim Campbell, is not only a great letterer in various freelancing and indie spheres. He blogged about how to letter comics, and he was unintentionally my instructor on how to letter comics. And when I talk to other letterers, I can name half a dozen who are my same generation, basically, where we read all those same blogs, studied that same way, and we could count Jim Campbell as our teacher for how we are lettering now. So it's a humbling space to be in, but a really creative space, and a warm one because everyone's supremely supportive of each other. There doesn't have to be professional jealousy because there's always going to be more comics to letter, more so than there are letterers out there.
So as kind of a follow-up to that, my best friend is lettering her first full comic right now. And,
Congratulations.
It's hand lettering. It's digital, but hand lettering. And it's so beautiful. And what I wonder with letters, because I also have friends that letter for manga translations. And when they talk about it, it's much more as they're like a third editor down the line, kind of the way they're looking at it. How much do you look at your lettering as a visual art or as an artistic contribution versus I'm making this functional on the page kind of?
It straddles that middle ground because I see my work as art. It's design work is art, but it's art with a direction and a purpose. Every page I work on, I'm not just thinking, will this look pretty on the page? I have to think, what is the reader going to think when they look at this page? Because I'm trying to get inside your head. I'm trying to see what you see to make sure that your eyes follow across the page and read the script at the right time, at the right place. So everything has the impact as intended. Because if you place things wrong, people could lose a line because the text is over here, but the action is way down there, and they just don't see it. The flow went completely in a different direction. The big MacGuffin that's in the background, if I cover that, you're not going to see it. And I have to make sure that as a reader, you're getting everything at the right beat at the right time. And so it's an art, most definitely. There are some moments where I'm just drawing things out or trying to place things in a way that's going to look aesthetically pleasing, but then all of it is with very direct intent of where it needs to go. It has to be very precise in its design. So it's a mix of the two. I consider lettering an art, but I admire the art as design work, and that's how it best functions for me.
I have a follow-up question to that too. I want to thank you for sharing the story of your career earlier. And I thought I was really struck by how you worked in translation earlier. And so I was thinking about how much you've worked with other people's words so much in your professional career, but in different ways, right? Translation is working with other people's words, but in a very different way than working with someone else's words in a lettering job. But I was just wondering if all of this has contributed to your design sensibilities, if somehow translating and being around words and knowing many languages has, in a way, taught you how to control the impressions that your lettering is making in readers.
Oh yeah, it definitely has had a huge impact. Learning a language like Japanese has been a huge impact on me, not just learning in language, but living out there, understanding what it is to be someone from another culture living in a different culture. I mean, gosh, if I had a drink every time I had a classmate who was like, I came to Japan because I want to be Japanese. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, you boy? But sorry. I just would get so discouraged by this feeling that like you can just immerse yourself and that's it. You're 100% that. And it's like, no, you're seeing things from a distance, but you can see things in a new perspective that way. I learned a lot about the approach to things and how they can be interpreted differently from different people's perspective. Particularly, one of the most startling things in Japan I learned was honne and tatemae. Honne is what you're really feeling. Tatemae is the most appropriate thing to do or say in a given situation. In America, it's like, well, they're just being polite in a kind of like derogatory way. They're just being polite. They don't mean this. But in Japan, it's like, of course you're being polite. You don't want to rock the boat here. But as the other person, I have to think about what you're feeling and assume what you're actually feeling may be different and help anticipate those needs. Like asking for someone help at work, even though you know it's taking time out of their schedule, you're just kind of like, sorry, but I need this. So you're coercing them into doing it. In Japan, I often see that wouldn't be the case because you wouldn't want to trouble someone else. Because you know if you ask, they'll say yes, but it's troubling for them. So you try not to put other people in that situation. And people think, tatemae ga ii. They understand this kind of thing. They're reading the air. When it comes to working as a freelancer, it ended up being really helpful to know not just what are people asking of me, but what do they want? And it helped me decipher situations where I realized that the person's intent and my intent are not going to mesh well together, so I should decline on this project. It helped me better at saying no to things when I realized that I should read better into the situations than what they are on the surface. Because up until I started living in Japan and learning the language and understanding the culture in a new way, I just took everything on the surface. People have to be what they say they are, and that's it. And if they say anything differently, then they're a liar and that's on them. And it's like, no, it's much more of anticipating people's needs and interpreting that and trying to deliver what they want, even if they can't verbalize it in just the right way. That's helped a lot. Also, just the practical aspects, being able to speak Japanese and understand Japanese aesthetics in manga, because I read so many manga, helped me in a lot of particular situations in lettering in a practical sense. There's $6 Million Man was a miniseries that we did with Chris Hastings, and there was moments where, because it was set in Japan, where characters would speak Japanese. And I was like, I could translate this, but I don't want it to be a poor translation. It would seem shoddy. I haven't been translating in by that time, by 6 years, and I didn't feel confident in it. I wanted to make sure it was done by someone with, active skills, because it's a organic thing. You're going to forget stuff. But unless you're constantly doing and studying and practicing and figuring out better ways to translate. So we brought on Zach Davison, who he would send me translated elements of the script, and I would know how to place things in Japanese. And then we'd get sound effects in Japanese to do. And I'm like, okay, I get to play with sound effects in Japanese on an American book. And that was really fun. So that was a good creative space. And then it turns out with Demon Days, Zach was hired again. And Zach is local to me out here in the city I live in. We're friends. I met my boyfriend through knowing Zach Davison. So that was kind of wild. And so getting to work on Demon Days together is super exciting for both of us, because we're old friends getting to do a collaborative thing together. And it's particularly interesting because doing Demon Days and releasing it, people are like, oh, this is okay, but I don't like the writing. I can't wait for them to release an original version. And it's wild to us because that is the original version. This book was made by an artist for the intention of it being an English book for the Western audiences. And people just assume Peach Momoko was intending it to be a manga first, but it's not. She wrote a script. She worked with Zach to adapt it into English, and I take that original script and letter it. So it's 100% meant for Western audiences to have first. And if it's translated into Japanese, that part is the translated version, not the original version, as some people tend to assume. I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. That was an awesome answer. I learned so much about perspective and immersion from that answer, and I also knew, like, I kind of figured there was more, like, a bigger story around Peach Momoko and Demon Days, and so I'm really glad you got to elaborate some of the the background behind that.
Yeah, Demon Days is gonna live in my heart forever.
That first issue is so good. Yeah,
it's just really special. It's special to me. It's special to Zach. I can't imagine how special it is to Peach. And Lindsay Koick, who's the editor for that book, it's super special to her too. So even if no one liked it, I know that we liked it. And
I'm so happy to hear that.
yeah. That's the one major thing I've learned as a letterer, because the very first book I lettered, and I did not get paid very well for. I learned a lot of hard things that time. And my very first experience as a letterer on that project is that there was a few reviews on the book. It wasn't very popular, but there was a few reviews, and one of the most consistent reviewers just hated my work. Every issue that came out, they'd say like, "Oh, all this stuff was good, but man, that letterer is terrible." And I was just like distraught. It's like, oh, I didn't realize it did such a bad job. But the rest of the team liked it. And that's when I realized it's like, oh, I'm not doing this for whether it gets a good critique. I'm not doing this whether the readers will enjoy it. That is a benefit, not an expectation. I'm only doing it in a way that the editors will like, the art team will like, the writer will like. If they are enjoying the product that I'm putting out, that's all I really need. That's when I know I'm doing okay. And anything else is just, ice cream on top. So it helps a lot to keep things in that perspective. That way you're not worrying about what the readers will think. You're just worrying about, like, how are you designing it for them to absorb the comic, you know? Mm-hmm.
Well, if it helps, Demon Days, I think everyone is loving it to a higher extent, and at least I'm aware that everyone in Comic Watch team loved that book. Like, it was, we chat about it in the rec room in the chat we have in the Slack for like quite a while, because it was like, wow.
I cannot wait. There are currently, I think, 3 major things that I'm really looking forward to this summer, and that's working on the next Demon Days. Whenever that happens, I'm super excited for it. I'm excited. I'm going to be working on the Marvel Legacy Pride issue.
Oh,
super excited about that.
Cool.
Yes.
And I get to do a story in the DC Pride issue. So
yes.
Only a letterer this year that's working on all the
We love it.
We love to hear it.
Love it.
Like, my family, I mentioned that we were stationed overseas for a big chunk. I didn't mention is that my mom is bisexual, and she raised me and my brother as an openly, bisexual woman. But when we were living overseas, we had to operate under data rules. So that's the don't ask, don't tell in the naval military, because we didn't want dad to lose his job. But it was really surreal to live in this weird parallel where outside our house, everyone just saw us as a normal family. But we knew that like my mom was bi, my brother's gay. I came out much later in my life because I was confused as to like, isn't it normal for a straight girl to get crushes on girls? Oh wait, that's not normal.
I know that
And when I
question.
came out to my family, my mom's like, duh. It's like, yeah, okay. Like he's been married to a guy for years now, and he's just like, hey, good on you. But being able to contribute to more, like that's a really great thing with lettering, is that like, yeah, I'm not writing the stories or drawing the stories, but I get to work with so many people, and I get to work with so many people in the LGBTQ community, so non-binary, bisexual, ace, like all these different people who have these identities that don't fit into that so-called normal box, and we get to work together on these projects that we're excited for, and just things excel from there. Like getting to work on S.W.O.R.D, it's inherently a work of queer creators because some of the creators on there are queer. Getting the GLAAD award was huge. For doing it was like one small part of a bigger thing for a huge Marvel event, but getting to letter the wedding between Billy and Teddy, it's like, that's one of the most formative things in the past decade for both me and my little brother. So getting to tell my brother is like, hey, I got an award for this one.
Aww.
And gosh, telling my mom, she like told everyone in Brazil, I'm pretty sure. You know that book that President Bolsonaro got really pissed off about? Yeah, he won an award for those characters.
That's amazing. Full circle. That's poetry.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's really exciting. I'm just really happy to be a part of these things. And that's kind of the thing about being a letterer, is like, I want to help make these amazing things. I don't want to do every single amazing thing under the sun. I don't want to write or draw. I want to just see these stories come together. I want to be the first one who gets to read these comics come together.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing, because these things, they are pretty iconic, that we are finally getting these queer anthologies from these big two publishers. Mm-hmm. And your name's going to be attached to it forever. And that is amazing. And I'm excited for you. Also excited for me to get to read it, but excited for you.
I'm so over the freaking moon for this one. So that is on tier with Demon Days. Everything else I'm just super happy to work on, but those in particular, it's like, I cannot mess these up. There's no failure in this. It can't happen.
Well, if it helps to boost it, I'm really happy that you're lettering that, because I particularly love your lettering. That's why I invited you. So, so I'm really happy that you're on that, because I'm really excited about that book.
It's just one more thing for us to be excited about now.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see how they come out. Man, I get so excited, particularly when because I mentioned that Richter's my favorite character. I get excited every time there's a new issue of Excalibur in my inbox. It's like, okay, here's your script, here's your art. And I'm like, let me just read it first. And then I'll get to work.
Just so you know, two of the characters you talk about today a lot, with that Richter and Ileana, are Gabriel's and mine favorite. Mine is Ileana, Gabriel is Richter. So we're really feeling you.
Yeah, you fit right in.
Man, I don't want to fight my other letters, but like if someone else gets assigned to a book where it's just Richter and Ileana going on a bar hopping or something, gosh.
No, that must be you.
We're going to put it out into the universe. You need to be the letterer for Richter and Ileana's bar hopping adventure.
Yes,
no
an
other
ongoing
options.
Series.
Yeah.
We have to write
getting
to
drunk and ending
Marvel.
up in different dimensions.
We have to make that pitch be coming to life. So,
Man.
And also, when we stop recording, I'm gonna propose you another show, but not now, so you don't have to be like,
We're not going to put you
Not
on the
yet.
spot like that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But yes, so final question that I have, if any of you all have another one, then you do the final after me. Like it's not the final episode, it's the final that I have.
Okay.
It's some general advice that I want to put in the word for someone that is starting to get into lettering, that maybe wants to be a letterer. Just like some of it. You have said some stuff that could apply to that, but I want to like ask you directly that.
Two things actually that I think a new letterer should keep in mind. One is whatever you commit to in a style for the book, stay consistent with that style. Don't second guess yourself. Once it's established, once everyone on the team likes it, don't second guess yourself. You're done with that part of the design. Just stay consistent with it, and then you can be creative in whatever elements you really want to have impact. That's a practical advice. Just a more in the industry advice, know as a letterer, you're not alone. You're not just some small person getting into the industry. You're a part of the industry. If you've worked on a book, you're technically broken in. You're here. There is no secret barrier or anything. You're here, you're a part of the community, and you can reach out to other letterers, because there's a lot of letterers, not just me, who you can just send a DM to and be like, I don't know how to do this thing. Can you help me? And it's like, sure. Or I'm not sure about this contract with these people. Are they good publishers? It's like, we'll talk to you. Don't feel alienated before even trying to reach out to other people. Because I can't speak for other elements of the industry, but I can speak for letterers have always been welcoming to me. And I've always tried to pay that forward. So if you ever have questions as a new letterer, if you just want someone to talk to, like reach out to me, and I can always help point you in the right direction of what you need. So that's it. That's all I got.
That was beautiful. So do we want to close it like this, or have you any of you have a question?
I think that's the best way to close it.
Okay. It was